Hi everyone, it's Kerry back with you. In my last video I shared a couple of journals that I had created that are featuring this binder mechanism on the inside of the journal, so it's just a 2-hole binder. Now I have created this journal from a much larger binder, something like this. So I'm going to show you how you can prepare one of these to make a journal like this. Now, when you're selecting your binder, not all binders are created equal, which I found out the hard way. So I've got a couple of other binders here in front of me to show you what to look for and just a few things to keep in mind when you're selecting a binder. So obviously the first thing to think about is the size of the binding mechanism. So if this is a 4-ring binder, I can't cut this down because this is a fixed and it's way too big. If you wanted a large journal, it would be perfectly fine to use something like this. So the next thing to think about is, even though this is a 2-ring binder, it has rings that protrude through the cover, which isn't necessarily a problem, but it is something that you need to bear in mind for when you're making your journal. Also, this is a much larger mechanism, so it's quite wide. Again, still perfectly fine to use, just something to keep in mind when you're making your journal selection. So that's that one there. And also, these two are both 2-hole binders, but this one is much larger in terms of the depth and how much paper you can pop onto the rings. And this one is quite a bit smaller. Let me see if I can put those up. So you can see there's a significant size difference between those two. So if you're wanting a really big, fat, chunky journal, you might want to select some with larger rings. Now the last thing to think about is this one is like a cardboard cover. It's got these gold foil dots on it, but the actual cover is cardboard inside. The creases of the journal, the creases of the binder are actually creased into the cardboard. So essentially this is one solid piece of cardboard that's been somehow mechanically scored to allow for the folding of the cover. Whereas one like this, which has been covered in some kind of vinyl, this is very flexible in the joints because there is no cardboard in these joints. It's actually just vinyl that, if you can see those little like divots along there, it's where it's been crimped and the vinyl's been melted. So that actually there is no cardboard inside here. There are 3 different sections of cardboard inside this journal. So essentially if you're making a journal with a front cover and a back cover and a spine with 3 separate pieces of cardboard, that is exactly what's inside this particular folder that has just then been covered with vinyl. So if you want to use one of these type of folders, when you start cutting the vinyl off, which I recommend that you do because you can see that it's puckering there, so anything that you adhere to the vinyl, firstly it's going to be difficult to adhere to vinyl, but secondly it's not going to be on a solid base, it's still on a movable base. So when I created this one, this was actually created from one of these vinyl type of journals. Once I had started cutting it down to size, that's when I realised that it was 3 different pieces. So when I went to recreate the journal, I've basically covered it like I would cover any other journal that I've got a spine and 2 covers. The mechanism is irrelevant in that sense. With a vinyl covered journal, it is a little bit more challenging to cut the vinyl away. You need to carefully cut around the mechanism because it's been this mechanism has been riveted on after the vinyl has been attached, so it's kind of very well stuck in there and you need to carefully cut around it to get it out. So having said that, once you've selected your binder, actually measuring it for your pages is the same regardless of which mechanism you choose. So you need to have decided what size pages you want to incorporate into your journal before you start measuring the folder to cut. So another thing that you'll need is a hole punch. This is just a standard 2-hole punch. If you're using a mechanism that's got 3 holes, then obviously you'll need a 3-hole punch, and so on and so forth. So for a journal this size, I've used quite small paper. This is actually just 1/4 of an A4 sheet. And rather than try and measure from the middle out, it's going to be a lot easier to measure from the outside in. But to know where our pages are going to end, you need to have a template of the page size that you're going to use in your journal. Now, some hole punches have a hole in the middle here so that when you pop your paper in, you can see through it to where the middle of your page is. Mine doesn't have that, so I've folded my page in half, and that's given me a crease in the middle here. So once I pop that crease into my hole punch, there's a little divot here that tells me where the middle is, and I can just pop that page in, line up my crease with the middle, and then punch my holes, and then that's going to be roughly where my pages will end up being punched. So I like to have a little bit of variance with my pages. So as you can see inside this journal, not all of the pages end at the same place. Some of them poke out a little bit further than others, and then some of them hang a little bit lower than others. I just visually like that look, and all that is me moving the pages slightly higher or lower in the punch before I punch the holes, and that gives me a little bit of movement in my page size. So once you've selected the page size that you think you're going to need, I've got a Sharpie here, but I would normally just use a pencil because you can easily rub it out if you want to. Then I decide how much bigger do I want this folder than my pages, and I'm pretty much eyeballing it. If you want to measure, that's up to you, but I say I like about this much extra from my page, so that's about 2 centimeters, I think. Yep, or if you're working in inches, it's just a bit under an inch. And then I just roughly do the same for the top and the bottom. I'm not measuring it exactly. And then what I do is, where my mark is on the inside of the folder here, I'm actually going to measure from the outside in, because not all of these mechanisms are going to have been placed in exactly the same place in a journal. For example, this one here has actually got the mechanism on the spine. Now that's something else to look out for when you are selecting your binder. It will work exactly the same way. The only difference with something like this is your pages aren't going to sit as flat, because you have to take into consideration this fold, and when you're opening and closing the journal, all of your pages are moving, as opposed to this one which the binding mechanism is on the back part, like on the back cover. So when you're opening and closing the journal, the pages actually stay, you know, stationary exactly where they are. You're only moving the cover and the spine. You're not moving all of the contents of the journal, which isn't a problem, but over time, you know, if you've got lots of things in your journal, you don't really want to be moving all of that backwards and forwards every time you have to open and close your journal. That's just my opinion. So it still will work if you have a journal, a binder with this middle section. It will still work exactly the same. There's nothing wrong with using something like that. So I've got my marks here, and I'm going to roughly measure what it is. So for me, this is just over 9.5 centimetres. So just to make my life easier, I'm going to say, I'm going to say it's 9.5 centimetres, and then I'm going to come down to the bottom here measure 9.5 centimetres, and then come up to the top here, measure 9.5 centimetres, and then this mark is now irrelevant because I've kind of changed the width a little bit just for the ease of measuring. That actually doesn't look right. That's 9.5. That's 9.5. So then when I take my ruler, I can rule a line between these two pieces, between these two marks, and I know that that is now a straight line. If I was going to use this mark, then I'd have to be measuring a lot more specifically, so it's actually 9 and it's 9.8 centimetres. So just for ease, I've gone 9.5. So then I know if I'm taking 9.5 centimetres off this side, in order to make this cover the same size, rather than try and measure from this fold, which may not be 100% accurate in measurements because it's a score line, it's not an actual page edge, I come over here and I do the same measurement. So from the edge of my page I'm going to go 9.5 and 9.5, and then just double check your measuring, because once you've cut it, it's cut. It's a lot easier to measure once, measure twice and cut once. Speaking from lots and lots of hard learnt experience. So those lines look even to me. Just double checking. So that's 9.5. That's 9.5. So once I've cut these edges off, I will then end up with a much shorter but very long binder. So then if you want to shorten the binder, we have to do the same thing. So turning it this way, and I'm going to measure this here. So it's pretty much right on 7. I'm going to give myself a little bit of extra playroom, so I'm going to go 7.5. I'm going to push my ruler over to this side against the spine, the score line in the spine, and just double check. So I'm going to mark it at 6.5 centimetres. That gives me a little bit of extra playroom, and then 6.5 centimetres there, and over here 6.5, and 6.5. Now I'm cutting this line off, so I only really need to have my line go here, and something wrong with my measuring. 6.5. 6.5. That's better. Now if you're using a pencil, it's going to be more accurate. These lines are a little bit too thick, but for the purpose of the video I wanted you to be able to see the lines. So as you can see, I've made a couple of measuring mistakes, so it's always better to measure it twice and then cut it just the one time. And then because I'm taking 6.5 off the bottom, I'm going to take 6.5 off the top as well. So now I've got my measurements, and you can see that these lines here will be what will be the size of my journal once I've cut all these lines. Now if you're using one of these cardboard binders, this cardboard is about 2 millimeters thick. You can cut it with a metal ruler and a craft knife, but don't try and cut all the way through in, you know, one pass. It's better to just be quite you know, light-handed and just gently run the knife over and over and over again until you cut through the piece. So once you've cut this side off, you can use this just to double check your measurement on the other side. So flip it over, line it up against the other edge, make sure it's straight, and verify that it's the same size on both sides. So you can still see my line is there, so then I have measured that correctly. So then you use your metal ruler and your knife and just carefully cut several times until you cut through this bottom cover. So I'll just do that and I'll be right back. So now my cover is the size that I want it, and when I fold it over it measures up. Everything is the right width that I would like, and my page size still fits inside. So now I have to do the same for the top and the bottom. Now these bits with the score line are a little bit more tricky because when you're running the knife over it, the knife might jump a little bit. So again, just take care when you're cutting this section. A lot of small cuts is better than pushing too hard and trying to do one cut, because you might slip and cut your finger, or you might slip and slice the cardboard incorrectly. So I'm just going to go and cut the bottom line off, and then I'll do the same and check that it measures up against my top line. So now I have my bottom piece cut off, and I'm just going to do the same thing to check that my measurements were correct on the top. And I can still see my line there, so that looks pretty good to me. So again, just cutting along the edge with your craft knife until you cut through the chipboard. So now I have my binder cut down to the size that I would like for my Freedom Journal. Everything closes nicely, the edges meet up nicely, and it's all nice and even and ready for me to go ahead and decorate and add all my pages into. So in the interest of full disclosure, I actually have a very large industrial guillotine that we use within the business. So I have the ability to cut these very thick card journals down on the guillotine. The very first one I've made it exactly the way that I've told you here, with the ruler and a sharp knife. But once I realised how much I enjoyed these journals, I wanted to be able to create more of them, and I wanted to do them quite quickly. Without a doubt, the hardest part of creating these journals is double checking and getting all those measurements right. As you saw, I mucked up the measurements a couple of times, and also then cutting the journal. It's worth it because I think they're really good fun to use, but that is without a doubt the hardest part of creating this journal. So what I've actually got is I have made a couple of these available in the shop for those of you that might not want to cut them down yourself or source the papers and that sort of thing. So this one has already been cut down. It's cut down to be the same size as this one that I created. If you haven't seen this journal, I'll pop a link below to the video so you can have a look at this one. And I'm also including with this naked journal kit some papers that I have cut down to be the correct size. There's approximately 50 papers here. Now these are larger ones which you can either fold or use to create pockets and that sort of thing. There's around about 50 pages. You get a variety of paper. There's some scrapbook paper which is double-sided, there's the tinted paper, there's coffee dyed paper, the 40 GSM paper, the thick vellum and the white chipboard. And then in the larger one there's the 40 GSM, some double-sided scrapbook paper and the tinted paper as well. So that gives you something to start with. I haven't punched holes in these because you might want to, make them lower, make them higher. You might want to turn some this way and fold the edges so you've got like smaller pages with pockets. But I've also included in these packs some of the extra stencils and chipboard elements that we had in this journal, so like little chipboard stamps and so on. So you'll get 4 different stencils. Each one of the Naked Journal kits will have 4 different mini tag stencils, but they may also be different from kit to kit, and each kit will have these 7 chipboard elements included. These will all be the same in every kit. So you've got the stamps, 2 different types of page tabs, some chipboard reinforcement rings, the word charms, the number tags and the little square tags. So they can all just be popped out and incorporated in your journal as well. But you don't need these are just, you know, options for you if you don't want to create the binder yourself. It's still very easy for you to be able to cut this down, source your own papers and make it personal for you. But I do hope that that has inspired you. I really love the ability to be able to journal freely with these journals, so it takes away that fear of, you know, mucking up your journal if you do something in it you don't like, or if you make too many spelling mistakes on your page, or you don't like your handwriting. So this gives you the ability to take the pages in, take the pages out, replace pages if you feel like you've mucked it up. It's just really gives you the freedom to be creative in your journals. So I hope that you have found that helpful. I will leave links below to the shop where these will be available. If you have any questions, please feel free to pop them below and I'll do my best to answer them for you. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!